A Lens at the End of a Regime, May 1945. A Hollywood director points his camera at the wreckage of a collapsing empire and cracks a dark joke to keep the nightmares at bay. Adolf Hitler is gone. The Wehrmacht has finally been beaten. George Stevens, fresh from filming the horrors of Dachau, stands on a ridge above Berchtesgaden with a small US Army camera unit. It's a moment so heavy you almost need a laugh just to breathe. But Stevens isn't rushing back to Hollywood. He wants proof. He wants the end of the Nazi regime recorded clearly so no one can pretend it didn't happen. And he has permission to film on the Obersalzberg, Hitler's private refuge, where the Berghof lies gutted and silent. It's not just a ruin, it's a symbol, a broken stage where a murderous ideology once posed, now reduced to ash and empty windows. He'll follow the trail from that mountain into Austria, across roads where people once cheered the Anschluss. He'll end up at the edges of surrender ceremonies, in cities learning how to live again, in streets where the past won't stay buried. And the footage will tell a simple truth. Endings aren't neat. They ripple, stall, and repeat. But the ending didn't start with signatures. It started with the camera refusing to look away. Obersalzberg, where the myth collapsed. On the Obersalzberg, Stevens and his team stepped through what used to be a fortress of propaganda. The Berghof, once the backdrop to carefully staged images of power, is now a burned-out shell. What had been sold as destiny looks small and fragile, like a theatre set after the audience has gone home. The frames capture that reversal perfectly. The power was always performative. The ruin exposes it. Stevens isn't there to sightsee, he's there to witness. After Dachau, the mission shifted from storytelling to evidence. Color film, clear angles, steady hands, these choices matter. This isn't a rumor or a retelling, it's proof. The air up here is thin and quiet. No speeches, no marching bands, just wind in the trees and the echo of a lie finally breaking. From the mountain, the road south calls. The camera follows it, but the end of a regime isn't just rubble on a hill, it's what people do next. On streets that once cheered and now claim they always opposed. Across Austria, Salzburg, Innsbruck, Brenner Pass, Stevens drives down into Austria. Salzburg first, then Innsbruck, then the road toward the Brenner Pass. The lens takes in squares and facades and faces. Austria in 1945 is complicated. In 1938, crowds welcomed the Anschluss. Flags bloomed across balconies, people raised their hands and called it unity. Years later, a gentler story will harden, the first victim narrative. There's truth in parts of it, there's evasion in parts of it. The camera isn't interested in debates, it records what's in front of it. You can feel the double life of these streets. The fear has faded, but the memory hasn't. The signs of recent power are still visible, even if the owners are gone. A country is trying to look away from its reflection and can't quite manage it. The travelogue look of these shots hides a deeper point. The war didn't end the same day everywhere. In Italy and southern Germany, the Wehrmacht had put down its weapons, but Austria as a whole wasn't finished, and the last German government, sitting in Flensburg, was still trying to bargain with the inevitable. They were about to run up against a wall in Reims. But before ink hits paper, the last government of a dying Reich tries one more play. Flensburg's last card, Jodl, flies to Reims. Berlin is rubble, but a government still flickers in Flensburg, near the Danish border. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's chosen successor, claims the wheel. His plan is as transparent as it is desperate. Surrender to the Western Allies first, keep the Soviet army at arm's length, and save as many Germans as possible from the Eastern Front's collapse. Some call it cynical, Some call it pragmatic. Either way, it's a stalling move under a falling ceiling. The Wehrmacht in Italy and southern Germany has laid down its arms. Austria isn't entirely done. Units still hold positions, ammunition still exists, orders still circulate. In this space between collapse and silence, Dönitz sends Colonel General Alfred Jodl to Reims, France. It's May 6, 1945. The mission is narrow and risky. Try to secure a separate ceasefire in the west. Buy time in the east. The Allied headquarters in Reims has no patience for half measures. Under General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the message is blunt. Unconditional surrender everywhere, all at once. Negotiations stall. Hours pass. Jodl doesn't have the authority to sign for all fronts. He hesitates, probes, waits for a telegram that can cover him. The British and Americans sharpen the edge. If there's more hedging, the bombers will fly again. Cities that have survived might not survive another week. Just after midnight, a telegram comes through. Flensburg says yes, Jodl can sign. Paper will try to end what bullets began, but what looks simple in one room is about to trigger anger in another. Reims after midnight, the first surrender. Reims is tired and crowded. The Allied command has turned the place into a crossroads of endings. To keep Moscow from fuming, a high-ranking Soviet liaison is in the room. The optics matter, the unity matters. The war in the East has been paid for in blood. No one wants a private Western deal that insults that. Kirke B. Lawton, Eisenhower's man for photojournalism, films on an amateur camera. A giant pivot in world history gets captured in quiet frames. At 2:39 a.m. on May 7, 1945, signatures move across paper. US General Walter Badel Smith signs. Soviet General Ivan Susloparov signs too. Reports claim he hasn't yet received formal authorization from Moscow and includes wording that would allow for a second ceremony. French Major General François Cévez adds his name as a witness. Then Alfred Jodl steps forward and signs on behalf of the German High Command. Eisenhower announces the ceasefire will take effect at 11:01 p.m. Central European Time on May 8th. That's the legal ending. That's the line the Allies agree to. On paper, it's tidy. In reality, endings take time to reach the front. When Josef Stalin hears the news from Reims, he's livid. He demands the final act be replayed on his stage in Berlin-Karlshorst under the eyes of the Red Army. He will not be an extra in someone else's finale.
Reims is done, and the world already knows. But the story has a second ending.
And while leaders argue over venues and signatures, the ground keeps moving. Confusion and quiet, diaries, rumors, and radio silence. The news of Reims runs ahead of the second ceremony. Radios blare announcements, papers scramble headlines. In the chaos of the last days, people don't know what to believe. German units rush west, hoping to surrender to American forces rather than fall into Soviet hands. It's calculation and fear, survival and rumor. On May 7th in Tyrol, author Erich Kästner writes in his diary. He notes the contradictions. The Flensburg radio station announces Jodl has signed and that the ceasefire begins tomorrow. A station in Bohemia calls the report a fabrication. In Berlin, the Soviets claim to have found the bodies of Joseph Goebbels, his wife and their children. Then the radios fall silent. There's quiet. Only the sound of cockchafers, those armored May beetles, hitting a lit window, a tiny, repetitive thud that feels like the war reduced to an echo. Somewhere in southeast Germany, a cameraman with Special Film Project 186 records the strange calm before the final bell. Between announcements and doubts, people stand in doorways and listen for the end of gunfire. The idea of peace is almost impossible to imagine, and yet the next day, the second ceremony will stamp the ending on Moscow's time. But history doesn't wait for exact times. It rolls over maps as soldiers still fight and civilians decide who they want to be when the shooting stops. In Bohemia, that decision arrives with tanks and a parade. Pilsen liberated, joy, danger, and a razor's edge. For 2 weeks, General George S. Patton's Third Army pushes at a stunning pace, 30 to 40 kilometers a day. In early May, his troops cross into Bohemia. On May 6th, American units enter Pilsen. The next day, the city explodes into joy. Streets fill, flags appear like flowers. People climb on tanks. You can feel 6 years of fear break in a noise that sounds like relief. Cameramen from Special Film Project 186 finally capture something they've barely seen since 1939, celebration. But the danger hasn't evaporated. In and around Pilsen, about 15,000 German troops are still in position. Their orders are simple and brutal: crush any Czech revolt. 2 American divisions now outnumber them. The German commander, General von Majewski, does the math. At 2:15 p.m. on May 6th, he signs the capitulation and orders his men to stop fighting. Then, in front of his staff and his wife, Majewski offed himself. One room is clapping in relief, another falls into a stunned silence. That's what endings look like up close. Exhilaration and emptiness touching at the same table. The American liberators remain in Pilsen for 7 months. The occupying Germans leave and don't return. But the marks of 6 years don't fade overnight. The city has a long memory, and the camera will not let that memory be smoothed over. To understand the celebration, you have to know the grief behind it. And Pilsen's grief goes back to 1939. Under the Protectorate, what Pilsen endured. In March 1939, Hitler breaks the Munich Agreement and marches into Czechoslovakia. The Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia is born under German control. For years, people in Pilsen live under rationing and raids, curfews and fear. The industrial city is a prize and a target. The Skoda works churn, and the war presses down on every block. Around 3,000 Jewish citizens from Pilsen are deported to concentration camps. Most never return. That number isn't just a statistic. It's the missing faces in every celebration photo from May 1945. It's the silence that lasts long after the flags come out. Right up until the capitulation, Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner's troops are entrenched in Bohemia. In Hitler's last will and testament, Schörner was appointed commander-in-chief of the army, a fanatical choice for a collapsing world. His creed could be summed up as strength through fear. He enforced it with brutal clarity. Even as American tanks rolled into Pilsen, Schörner's shadow hung over the region. And when authority collapses, it often leaves anger in the streets, vengeance and vacuum, fear, fury, and the edge of justice. The German prisoners of war are escorted out of towns by Czech resistance fighters. Some images look calm and organized, but in places where the arrival of the Allies lagged and a power vacuum formed, violence surged. The mood was raw and dangerous. Revenge felt close and, for some, irresistible. Czech president in exile Edvard Beneš was quoted before the war even ended. The Germans will be paid back many times over and without mercy for all the crimes they have committed in our land since 1938. That kind of statement poured fuel on already burning coals. American forces repeatedly came across the victims of acts of vengeance. The camera caught the aftermath because someone had to. It's May 8, 1945, the last day of the Second World War in Europe. The Czechs celebrate their American liberators. For their former tormentors, there is only contempt. Bodies are carted away and buried in anonymous places. As one bitter line had it, no one in Bohemia shed a tear for a dead German. History records that anger, it does so without forgiving what came before. At the Soviet-American demarcation line, a cameraman with Special Film Project 186 films a steady stream. A Wehrmacht officer is made to hand over his pistol before being allowed through a checkpoint. A German general surrenders in a convertible and is then chauffeured by a US military policeman to a camp for high-ranking prisoners. It is both surreal and inevitable.
Lines are drawn, and they hold, for now.
But on those lines, the war's weight is personal. On the line, Dönitz speaks, soldiers wait, Truman answers. On May 8th at 12:30 p.m., Reich President Karl Dönitz addresses what is left of the nation on the radio. He reminds people he informed them of Hitler's death on May 1st and of his own appointment as successor. He claims his first task has been to save German lives. He says that in the night of May 6th to 7th, he ordered the High Command to declare unconditional surrender. At 11 p.m. on May 8th, he says, the guns will fall silent. For most defeated soldiers, there's no motorcade to a comfortable camp. There's a road, there's a pack, there are feet that won't stop hurting for days. One soldier remembers May 8th this way, terrified by what might happen, aware of being surrounded in Czechoslovakia, wondering what the next few days would bring. Then the announcement. The new Führer, Dönitz, says it's over. Lives might be spared. Then the harder question. What becomes of us now? Later that day, US President Harry S. Truman addresses his nation. He calls it a solemn and glorious hour. The joy is real but restrained by the price paid to get there. He speaks of ridding the world of Hitler and his evil power. The job is not done. The Pacific War still burns. But in Europe, the guns will stop. These broadcasts are the soundtrack to the last hours of a continent's war. The words are measured, the emotions are not. And even as leaders talk, individuals make choices that reveal who they really were. The Fanatics' Exit, Hans Ulrich Rudel and the Afterlife of Belief. On May 8th in Kitzingen near Würzburg, a cameraman from Special Film Project 186 films a surrender that fascinates and disgusts at the same time. Hans Ulrich Rudel, a fighter and bomber pilot, arrives with his squadron after flying out of Bohemia to give himself up to the Americans. He is the most decorated member of the German armed forces, the only one awarded the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaves, swords and diamonds. He is also a fanatical Nazi. In March 1945, still recovering from a serious wound, Rudel appeared in Joseph Goebbels' newsreel, urging Germans to stand firm, to grit their teeth, to believe in a final victory that wasn't coming. After the surrender, Rudel presents himself to his American hosts as cultured and dutiful, as a soldier who simply did his job. He spends nearly a year in American captivity. After release, he starts a haulage company. Then in 1948, he slips away along the rat lines to South America. Argentina becomes a base. Rudel helps set up relief networks for Nazi fugitives and keeps close ties with fascists from Italy and Croatia. He later works with dictators in Paraguay and Chile, sometimes staying at Colonia Dignidad, a notorious compound linked to torture and terror. He ends the war as an amputee, but never abandons the idea that National Socialism was, at heart, a good idea. That is the most chilling thing about him, his calm certainty after everything. In this, he finds common cause with Lieutenant General Adolf Galland, another highly decorated pilot. Galland also goes to Argentina after captivity, serving as an advisor to President Juan Perón's Air Force before returning to Germany when politics shift. Rudel does not come back in the same way. He maintains links to the neo-Nazi scene in Germany for the rest of his life. His funeral in 1982 becomes a macabre spectacle. Old comrades with outlawed salutes, a low pass by German jets, all three verses of the national anthem sung out loud. The past insisting it isn't past. Endings are never universal. Some people step forward into the future, others drag the past along like a flag. And while one city in Germany revels in peace, another shows what war costs when it comes from the sky. London's high, Churchill's peak, and the turn of fortune. In London, on May 8th, the streets fill with people. The end of the war in Europe unleashes a wave of relief the city has earned with years of bomb scars and nights in shelters. Winston Churchill, who took office on May the 10th, 1940, almost 5 years to the day, calls it the greatest outburst of joy in human history. He writes later that the vanquished and the victors both felt the same relief, the same exhaustion. The words land like a benediction on people who've lived too long without certainty. Churchill had promised blood, toil, tears and sweat, and he had delivered all four. His contempt for Hitler knew no bounds. VE Day is the biggest triumph of his life. As he drives through London, crowds cheer a man who held the line when it might have snapped. And then, in one of history's sharper turns, within 2 months he loses an election and leaves office. Victory and defeat in one season. The public makes a different choice for the peace. At Westminster Abbey, the government and the Crown attend a service of thanksgiving. The congregation sings Isaac Watts's words from 1708. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come. The royal family leads the way out. King George VI, Queen Elizabeth and their daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret. Plans had once existed to send them to Canada for safety. The Queen had refused. The children won't go without me. I won't leave the King, and the King will never leave. They stayed through the Blitz, visiting shelters and ruins, distributing comfort that was more than symbolic. The British end this chapter with gratitude and a choice about their future. That is its own kind of victory. Across the calendar, but just a slice east in time zones, another day takes center stage. May 9th, the Soviet Day of Victory. May 9th, 1945. At a barracks in Wiesbaden, liberated Soviet forced laborers celebrate. Most had been deported after the Nazis invaded Ukraine and Belarus. Many had worked in armaments factories. The relief in their faces is a language you don't need to translate. For Soviet citizens, May 9th is the day of liberation. The second surrender, signed after midnight Moscow time in Berlin-Karlshorst, makes the timing official. The symbolism matters. This is the day the Red Army's sacrifice is recognized under the bright light of a Soviet ceremony. A camera team with Special Film Project 186 films the event as a statement by Stalin is read. 3 years earlier, Hitler had promised the destruction and dismemberment of the Soviet Union. He had boasted of tearing away the Caucasus, Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, and more. We will destroy Russia, he had declared, so she will never rise again. The progress of the war scattered those threats. Germany is defeated. Soviet troops are everywhere. The Soviet message includes a claim: there will be no dismemberment of Germany, no destruction, an assertion of victory without vengeance at the state level. The people in the room absorb the words and the meaning. The cost, 27 million Soviet lives, hangs unspoken but very present. In those same hours, the second surrender at Berlin-Karlshorst inscribes the ending for the record. It's why Europe splits its commemoration. May 8th in the West, May 9th in the East. One end, two clocks. While speeches confirm what fighting has already decided, the roads tell their own story. Collapse at the border, Schörner's flight, SS in the crowd, and a traffic jam of defeat. On a road near the Czechoslovak border, 2 US Air Force cameramen capture a river of men and machines flowing toward American custody. Wehrmacht remnants pour west in columns to escape the Red Army. Reports claim their supreme commander in the region, Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner, has already cut loose. Dressed in civilian clothes, carrying several thousand marks from government coffers, he reportedly flies in a Fieseler Storch to Austria on May the 9th and is soon arrested by Americans. For a man who preached strength through fear, it's a telling ending. Some leaders always find an exit. Members of the SS, who had often fought with fanatical resolve in the final weeks, melt into the crowds of ordinary soldiers, nurses, clerks and refugees. Their uniforms don't always give them away. The camera's eye notes the details: a child soldier who survived, an officer in pristine SS attire trying to project authority even as he surrenders, a lieutenant colonel stepping forward with the self-confidence of a man who refuses to admit the world has changed. The GIs are unimpressed. They remember the Ardennes and the atrocities committed against American prisoners. On the far side of the line, in the small village of Tannenbergstall, convoys of Germans who have surrendered to the Americans clog the road. They lay down their arms in a sorted and orderly fashion, just as the Supreme Command demanded. On May 9th, about 10 million Germans put their weapons on the ground. It's a number that defies imagination. A continent-sized army dissolves into individuals. None of the senior Wehrmacht officers had found the courage to forbid the senseless slaughter of the final days. Even after Hitler offed himself in Berlin, the killing continued. In the last week alone, about 95,000 German soldiers died, for nothing, for orders issued by ghosts. Some try to vanish. A private swaps insignia for a jacket with missing buttons. A sergeant trades cigarettes for trousers. An officer tucks his papers under his shirt and hopes not to be recognized. It's the messy reality of unconditional surrender. The war is over, and it's not. The diaries catch the detail the big numbers miss. Tyrol, May 10th, hunger, barter, and the price of cloth. Erich Kästner writes again on May 10th, this time capturing the strange economy of defeat. The procession of limping soldiers feels endless. Cigarettes turn into currency. A neighbor trades 450 cigarettes for an old pair of trousers. Someone offers 3 pounds of smoked sausage, 20 cigarettes and 100 marks for a suit and gets turned down. Wardrobes are empty. Sore feet and empty stomachs will do more to end a war than speeches ever could. People who have lost sons in the fighting are in no mood to haggle. Anger flashes in doorways, doors slam. Everyone is exhausted. Winning, losing, these words don't feed you. They don't keep you warm. Survival runs on strange math in the first days after a surrender. A week after the capitulation, the camera moves again. This time to a city learning what it means to live with a defeat it has not fully faced. August, May 14th. Relief, denial, and the work ahead. A week after Germany's unconditional surrender, a special film project, 186 Team Films in Augsburg. The city had surrendered peacefully on April 28th and avoided a battle that would have added to the rubble. People breathe out in relief. An inhabitant remembers it later as a double feeling, defeat and liberation at once. You knew the end was coming, you could feel it in the air. But it took time to understand what being liberated meant from the inside. Another diary entry, written on May 8th, captures that disorienting calm. What a beautiful day! Nature is fresh and young. The sky is blue. You'd expect bells and jubilation. Instead, people walk to work or take a stroll as if the last 6 years had happened somewhere else. There's a quiet instinct to glide over the past, to act unpolitical, to avoid the questions. The victors don't agree, they come with a plan. General Eisenhower's proclamation number 1 is explicit. We come as conquerors, but not as oppressors. We shall obliterate Nazism and German militarism. We shall overthrow the Nazi rule, dissolve the Nazi party, and abolish the cruel, oppressive, and discriminatory laws and institutions which the party has created. The American vision for Germany's future is laid out on paper. Administrative structures, political parties, cultural life, all modeled on Western democratic norms. Not everyone is ready to face it. People focus on food, shelter, work. The guilt is easier to suppress than to examine. Denazification tribunals multiply, hundreds of thousands of cases, classifying people as major offenders, lesser offenders, followers, or exonerated. About 2/3 fall into the last two categories. The scale of evil and the scale of ordinary life collide and blur. And then the camera finds one face that cannot be blurred. Göring in Augsburg, charm, evasion, and a fate delayed. On May 14th, the Air Force team films the most prominent Nazi still in Allied hands, Hermann Göring. At 52, the Reichsmarshal strides toward the camera as if it were a press call after a lost football match. He had been Hitler's deputy for years, then was stripped of his positions near the end. Convinced he would become the successor, he instead found himself in Allied custody at an interrogation center in Augsburg. He smiles, he charms. According to author Klaus Mann, reporting from defeated Germany, Göring doesn't even look particularly sinister in person. Rather the opposite, Mann writes. The face shows a brute streak, a glint in the eye, but the overall effect is that of a Renaissance condottiere, cruelty mixed with a grim joviality. Göring claims that had he known about the camps, he would have acted. The dodge is familiar. The camera sees the smoothness of the performance and the emptiness of the claim. The victors don't buy it. Göring stands trial at Nuremberg, one of the principal defendants. He is sentenced to death in 1946. Hours before the execution, he avoids the noose by taking a cyanide capsule. The main thing, he is said to have quipped, is that for 12 years I had a good life. It's a line that reveals more than he intended. Power insulated him from shame right to the end. The camera records his face so the future will know it when it sees it again. A warning, not a portrait. The lens keeps moving. There's one more German city that holds a different kind of ending. Hamburg, fire, ruins, and a peaceful surrender. June 1945. George Stevens and his team drive north to Hamburg. Berlin is still off-limits to Western reporters. The capital is in Soviet hands and will only open to Allied sectors on July 1st. Stevens has been waiting for permission ever since the capitulation. For now, Hamburg will answer the questions the camera can ask. The port at the Kehrwiederspitze is scarred but standing. About 80% of the port area has been destroyed in raids. The navigation channels are clogged by wreckage and rubble. Children wander near the camera, curious and bold. Hafenstrasse and the old Elbe Tunnel become images of a city that still knows itself, even in pieces. In 1943, Hamburg became the target of a devastating Allied effort, Operation Gomorrah. Hundreds of thousands of incendiaries set the city alight. Firestorms roared through neighborhoods, claiming 34,000 lives. Author Hans-Erich Nossack wrote about the annihilation of his hometown. It wasn't that you sobbed when you returned to a place that no longer existed, he said. It was that you couldn't comprehend the weight. The mind couldn't hold it all. Hitler had declared Hamburg a fortress to be defended to the last bullet. The city's military leaders ignored his order to destroy the port. On May 3, 1945, Hamburg surrendered peacefully to the British. That refusal to obey a final destructive edict saved lives and the bones of the city. Stevens tours the wasteland in a jeep. The camera frames streets where buildings become teeth, in a broken jaw. People want the basics: a roof, food, safety. Politics can wait. Memory can't. Early July arrives. The permission finally does too, to Berlin and Potsdam. The camera keeps rolling. In early July 1945, Stevens gets clearance to leave Hamburg and head for Berlin. He and his team drive over the Elbe bridges toward a city that had been the center of a world it tried to impose by force. Rolls of 16mm color film are ready. The target: Hitler's capital as it now stands, and the conference about to shape the future. The Big Three meeting in Potsdam: Stalin, Truman, and Churchill. The road to Berlin is more than a journey. It's a last look at the war before peace hardens into politics. The camera that started at the end in Bavaria will now stand in the middle of the next beginning. The images that follow: street signs in Cyrillic, ruins in every direction, leaders sitting at a table to divide responsibility and redraw expectations, will become some of the most replayed frames of the century. The lens that wouldn't look away at Dachau and Obersalzberg won't blink now either. What does it all add up to? Conclusion: one end, two clocks, and a camera that wouldn't lie. This is how a regime ends, not in one room, not with a single signature, but in layered moments that don't line up on a single calendar. There's a ruin on a mountain where a dictator once posed for perfect pictures. There's a table at Reims where ink tried to force chaos into order. There's a second ceremony in Berlin-Karlshorst, staged to satisfy a furious ally and acknowledge 27 million dead. There's a parade in Pilsen where 6 years of fear finally let go. There's a diary entry about radios falling silent and insects tapping glass. There's a line of soldiers at a demarcation checkpoint handing over pistols. There's a general who can't bear to face the morning and offed himself. There's a pilot who still thinks the wrong idea is right, even in exile. The camera holds these contradictions together. It records celebration and vengeance, dignity and denial, truth and spin. It catches Göring's smile and Schörner's flight. It sees Rudel's polished courtesy and the ragged barter for trousers. It reads Eisenhower's proclamation and Truman's sober joy. It hears Churchill's thunder and the quiet stubbornness of a queen who refused to run. It looks at Hamburg's fire-washed streets and doesn't pretend the past didn't happen. History rarely ends in a straight line. It ends in ripples, it ends more than once, it ends differently depending on which clock you're using and which border you're near. But when the lens is steady and the scenes are honest, the fog lifts. You see what happened, you see who chose what, you see how a myth sold as a 1,000-year future can collapse in a week and leave behind a pile of documents, a set of ruins, and footage that refutes the lie. George Stevens and the cameramen of Special Film Project 186 didn't make the ending. They made sure it couldn't be rewritten. That's the gift of these frames. They don't ask you to trust them. They ask you to look, and when you do, you can't look away.
Because the truth is right there, in colour, in silence, in crowds, in ruins, telling you exactly how the old world died and what it cost to bury it.